it's an amazing idea to bring these, particularly these three, I think, together. Were they the characters from the start, or did you have to look for the characters? Did you have the shape of the novel and what you wanted to say about desire and about wanting from the start, or did they have to be found to fit in with what you wanted to write?
Well, the great lie of what I've been doing the last couple of weeks, and I feel a dreadful fraud, is that...
well, you should expose it here on Slow TV, Richard.
I will tell
me
everybody out there,
the great fraud
everyone who's Googled
Richard
this.
Flanagan.
Well, the great fraud of me takes many forms, but not the least is that there's a pretense that, firstly, that I could tell you anything meaningful about the book, whereas everything I know about the book is contained within
the book, yeah.
And everything beyond it, I always recognise as being untruthful, a lie. The second part of it that is false is that it is as though you start out with some set intentions and then you more or less successfully realise them, whereas the truth is you start out with some vague aspirations.
And a blank screen.
Yeah, and the blinking cursor, and you end up failing to achieve any of them. But hopefully you go somewhere else, and in the course of writings come to you revelations as mysterious and intriguing to you as they are to the reader when they read them. So I did start out with a couple of... it is a combination of that odd mystery of writing and a rather the low cunning of crafting that, where you are consciously aware that you have some characters and they must be plausible and they must behave and interact in ways that take the reader through the book. But I guess more and more in this book I just wanted to trust the reader. I didn't want to put in glosses of what I thought people thought or did or said, More and more I just want to report back what I imagined these people did and said, and then leave it to the reader to draw their own conclusions, whether they thought these people were bestial or simply sad or extraordinary. But they're all judgments for the reader and for God, but not for a writer. A writer's task is much more humble. So I've largely lost literary ambition, I just try and really trust a story, because story always opens us up to the things that, to that chaos we all carry within us.
I've heard you talking about story a lot, and I talk about it a lot with the magazine and trying to get pieces that tell stories.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable how many people don't, tell stories. In wider journalism, I think today has lost some of its ability to tell, beautiful stories or sad stories, or there's a lot of opinion, there's a lot of facts, and you talked, I think recently at an awards ceremony about refusing to dumb down your storytelling, and is that an easy thing to do as a writer who has to make a living? You have to sell your books, and to decide I'm not going to care about that. I'm just going to write.
Well, I don't see it as a battle between being
commercial or not.
Yeah, and I don't see it as a battle between being dumbed down and clever. It's the opposite of that. The better you tell the story, the more accessible it will be, because story is something that joins everybody.
Is it easy for you to do? Do you find it easy to sit down and write every day, or are you a more...
Well, I never thought I'd get to be a full-time writer. When I left school at 16 and went to work as a surveyor's chamberman, which was sort of cutting lines through the bush with slash, hook and axe and that, one day it was very wet, and so we had to stay back at the offices of the surveyor, and me and the other old chamberman were out in this garage in the back, and they got us to get all this old furniture they were throwing out, and we were to take it to the tip. And there was one chair which I kept and slowly did up in, you know, what moments I could grab at the end of the day. And I thought one day I'll be a writer and I'll sit in that chair and I'll write books. And I do. I've written all my books sitting on that chair. I love being able to write every day, but I think writing story is the hardest thing. It's very difficult. And story is more and more debased in our society. We value opinion, fixed opinion and ideology over story because...
Well, it's the column, it's the constant, just, I think.
They're the new fire and brimstone preachers in the hall, casting people out and saying what we shall and shan't do. Whereas stories like humour, like art, don't do that. They remind us that contained within us are all possibilities, and that we should shun nobody, and that we should accept all forms of behaviour because we could have been capable of any of them. Story, I think we are as an age ever more fearful of story, and so when you write novels you often find them attacked for not being authentic. This book has the motley of the past thrown over it. So people are very concerned in their interviews to ask what is historical and what is fiction, to which I can only reply the whole thing is a story, and if people wish to read history they should go to the history books.
Does it surprise you that, you know, you have to justify this decision to the extent that you do? Does it irritate you?
Yeah, it does, because it should be obvious, and that writers have been taken from the past forever, but they've not been writing about the past. They've been writing about the here and now and what lurks within. And why on earth writers have to constantly simply justify the fact of invention and fancy? Why it is that, as Oscar Wilde said, give a man a mask and he'll tell you the truth, take the mask away and he can only lie. Why that seems to be no longer understood is somewhat saddening, but then maybe it was ever thus. Maybe I make too much of the hostility now, because we forget in the 19th century, in the 18th century, there was a terrible fear of novels, and
it was a different set of concerns, wasn't it?
It was, and you know, people who saw themselves as cultured and educated wouldn't have their children reading novels. They'd give them moral grammars to read. Now we have non-fiction, which sort of serves much of the same point.
Was it particularly fun to write the character of Dickens, another writer, great writer, or difficult?
Well, it was, you know, perhaps the audacity and naivety, I suppose. I remember my publisher said to me, do you really wish to make a character of the greatest creator of characters in the language, which did momentarily chill me to the core. But I'd longed to write at least part of a novel that dealt with the strange alchemy of writing, to show that writers are as shaped by their writing as they shape it themselves, to write about how writing doesn't always make writers more as human beings, that it can diminish them, that there can be a great human cost to the act of writing things that might enrich others' souls. And so I realised that with this story I could attempt to say some of these things, and I did like it, you know, and I thought again about Dickens, who really did pay a large price for, you know, his great works, and I thought how odd it is with him, because as an artist he's so misunderstood, which may be one of the reasons he's endured, because only when you're understood, that's when you normally pass into obscurity. But he's seen as the archetypal Victorian who wrote these novels that in ways are very worthy in the way they show society, and domesticity, but as an artist, he's infinitely radical, you know, and all that is just the sort of tedious window dressing in order that he can actually do much more wild things with the novel. And he really comes out of the spirit of writers I love, like Lawrence Stern and Smollett, and that much more anarchic and subversive tradition of novel writing. So the more I thought about him, the more he intrigued me, and I did like being able to write about a writer in a way that hopefully might illuminate the practice a little for readers.
Mm. And Sir John Franklin, when I was reading Wanting, it made me want to... I mean, I think one of the lovely things about historical fiction is that it peps up your interest and reminds you of these characters and imaginings, and I wanted to go out and find all I could about Sir Franklin, Sir John, and learn about him. Why him?
Why so? Well, simply because
he fitted with the story.
He was
he
there.
Disappeared.
Yeah,
and then,
I mean, he's the Forrest Gump of the 19th century. He's sort of at everything from the Battle of Trafalgar to the Northwest Passage, and he never acquits himself well, you know, and yet he's there. And I think that's why he's attractive to writers, and he's been written about a lot. There was a novel in Germany in the 1980s that was this phenomenon called Slowness, or the History of Slowness, or something, and it's the novel of Sir John Franklin's life, and it's about this idea that he's so slow that this in itself is a virtue, and that
how fantastic!
And that is seen to be one of the key works to inspire the slow food movement. It inspired television shows, documentaries. It even inspired for a brief time a corporate training fad where all those hapless suits were put through, you know, courses in trying to slow down.
Well, they don't need them anymore, do they?
They've slowed right down.
They've slowed right down, yeah.
Come to a full stop.
That's remarkable. So it was obviously published in English, and
it was published in English by Canongate, I think, and it's got a bit of a cult following, but it never took off. I think it sold millions there. But the Franklins, you know, there's certain stories that we return to again and again. The Franklins is one. And they're often bestsellers. I think of the Wreck of the Batavia and all that story. I mean, that's been a bestseller for 400 years. The books keep coming out. I think the first book about that was only several years after the whole horror was uncovered, and that was a bestseller in Europe at the time. And then on it's gone. And I think that's because they're stories that are always open to a different telling and a different way of thinking about them. They're never closed. Closed stories, you know, just take you back to the banality of politics. You know.
Your brother Martin described you as the escaped convict in your family recently, and I just really have to ask you what you think he means by that.
He's got this thing that we were born in Longford. I mean, I'm from a family of 6, March 4th, I'm number 5. And he thinks he was very influenced growing up in Longford, which was one of the oldest settled parts of Tasmania. Seemingly almost English landscape, although it's not. Big kangaroo hunting grounds for the Aborigines before they were taken over as some of the prime land grants in the early days of the colony. So Mart grew up there, and he thinks that really affected him. Sort of a beautiful, settled little world that, you know, had its feet half still in the 19th century when we were born. But I grew up in the West Coast in a mining town called Rosebery, which was very isolated then. It was surrounded by rainforest. It was on one mountain is the oldest living thing in the world, a Huon pine that's 10,000 years old. It was wild and tough. It was violent. You'd walk up and down the main street, there'd be drunks, there'd be fights. It was vulgar and beautiful and passionate. And he thinks that I was that I'm much more a product of that as he is of that of the world of Longford. I'm a product of the West Coast and Rosebery. The escape comedy, that's probably just because I've got an ugly looking head, I reckon. That's, I don't know anyway.
As opposed to your gorgeous looking brother.
Yeah, the good looking hirsute brother.
Well, I should actually ask you really quickly what's next.
Well, I'm reminded of Isaac Babel, the Russian short story writer, and he'd just finished a book, and a journalist went to see him. They said, "What's next?" He said, "I'm in a goat buying mood." And I remember reading that, and I thought, I don't know what a goat buying mood is, but I think I'm in one now. You know, I don't know. I never know.
Lovely,
I guess
yeah.
I'll just get up the next day and see what happens. I've never really known what's going to happen next, but I always want to be part of it.
Thanks, Richard, for talking today to Slow TV. We've been given the wrap-up sign already. Well, I know, yeah. It was all too quick.